Let's welcome back to our stage GW's Executive Director of Sustainability, Kathleen Merrigan. And Kathleen is going to be interviewing our keynote speaker, chef and co-owner of Blue Hill and Blue Hill at Stone Barns, located 30 miles north of New York City, and the author of The Third Plate, Dan Barber.
Woohoo! This, ladies and gentlemen, is one of my favorite people in the whole world. He came down bright and early this morning on the train, left his restaurant, left his young family to be here to talk about wasted food. I couldn't be more thrilled. I have his book here. I'm doing product placement. He wouldn't do it. The Third Plate. It is one of the most important books about food that I've ever read, and I use it in the course that I teach in the spring. I've bought so many copies. I've put them probably on the New York Times bestseller list. It's really that good.
And you're getting 5%. So
there you go. You reveal it all. So Dan, you just got back from a little bit of travel. Where were you? What were you doing?
I just arrived back last night from Sweden, Stockholm, Sweden, and we did a meal. We did 30 courses based on food waste from Stockholm. So we spent months investigating the waste stream of Stockholm's food chain, and we put together a menu to encapsulate this issue and inspire and really to educate ourselves. It was fascinating.
Some mucky mucks there? Some important people?
Well, there were a lot of press people. Yeah, it was filled with a lot of interest. There's a whole movement going on in Europe and in Sweden, especially just a new food movement around sustainability, around ideas connected to locality and to their traditional cuisine. And so I was trying to look at the waste issue from the perspective of this is really a historical issue with the Swedes, and to look at the future of food, looking back at some of these issues is really instructive, and so that it worked well.
So I don't know if I should say it in public, but yeah. What's a pickle butt? It sounds like a rude thing. What's a pickle butt? Well, you're all about pickle butts.
Yeah, we talked to, you're referring to the garnish for our wasted vegetable hamburger, which is a juice pulp burger, which was, I don't know what's happening in DC. In New York, there's a big juice craze, right? And so down the street from Blue Hill, New York, is actually lines around the block every morning for these juices. And we went and talked to them about what happens to the pulp that's left over after you juice. And we went to the facility that does all the juicing, and there was enough pulp to fill this room every week. It gets trucked down to Virginia and dumped in landfills. And so we took the pulp and we played around with it for a few months, roasting it, drying it, and we fashioned it into a hamburger, into a vegetable pulp hamburger. And because there's so much beets, and apparently beet juice is a popular breakfast part of the breakfast juice craze. And so it turned the hamburger red, so you were getting like a rare steak, rare hamburger, whatever. And it just like, it became very popular. And with it, we had to serve pickles. And so we contacted a pickle processor in upstate New York, one of the largest in the Northeast, and we asked him, is there any waste in the pickling process, assuming that he was going to say no, and if he was immediately thrilled and said, I've been thinking about this my whole career. We cut off the ends of the pickles so that when you look at a jar of pickles, you don't see the butt end. And there's an industry term, they're called pickle butts, and we throw them away. And so every week we got a shipment of a couple 100 pounds of these pickle butts that were delicious, beautiful, and that became the garnish for the juice pulp hamburger, cheeseburger actually, yeah.
So now I went to your unbelievably gorgeous restaurant in right outside of New York City, the Stone Barns Center for Food and Agriculture, which is an educational center, and you're trying to actually educate the diner at your nice restaurant. And I had a thing called dumpster dive salad.
Yeah.
Should I be, can you clarify? Because some people, you hear that name, you hear the concept wasted food, you're not really going down into the dumpster and getting what?
Yeah. Well, it was my attempt to be provocative so that everyone would get asked about it. It's like my Trump moment. I wanted to be controversial, grab the attention, and then say, no, we weren't diving into the dumpster. But actually, you kind of were. I mean, it was basically contacting a food processor that cuts vegetables perfectly for salads, for supermarkets, or for bodegas, et cetera. And what's left, the trimmings of the machine cuts, gets dumped in these literal dumpsters. And so we diverted the chutes that go to the dumpster and put it into bags, and we fashioned a daily salad out of it and called it dumpster diving so we could capture your attention to the issue.
So now, are you alone?
I'm actually less, just to add to that, it's like I'm less interested in that and in some ways in the juice bowl burger and just the provocative idea, because I like that it captures attention, of course, but really the issue of food waste, as I continue to learn in this maturation that I'm going through on this issue, it's like that is such a small percentage of the problem when it comes to food waste. And the bigger issue, as I kind of alluded to, the Swedish really brought home to me, and this meal that we prepared in Sweden, is that the much bigger issue has to do with overall agriculture use in our diets, or just our daily diets. We don't, in the conversation about food waste, we talk about ugly fruits and vegetables, we talk about what's being thrown away, we talked about expired dairy, we talk about all these issues that are good because people can activate themselves to do something about it or change their idea of what is uncoveted or not delicious or not acceptable. And that's important, but it's such a small slice compared to the 120 million acres of cow corn that we grow in this country that's devoted to feeding cows or making plastics or indoor gas tanks or whatever. And what if we converted some of that land into diversified crops that would feed people? That's another way to look at food waste. Or wheat. We eat 99% of the wheat we eat is just the white stuff, and the bran, which is 15% of this wheat seed. There's 60 million acres of wheat, so 15% of 60 million acres is quite a bit. We throw that either away or we feed it to animals. And what if we ate that directly? And so for Sweden, we created a bread with 200% whole wheat. So we all know 100% whole wheat, but we took the waste bran from a mill, and instead of having them sell that off to pig feed, we mixed that into the bread loaf and created a 200%, 100% more to the 100% whole wheat, if you will, by weight, and created a 200% to say it was delicious. It took a little bit of R&D, but it was to say, what if we started to eat this deliciousness and this healthfulness and started to inculcate it into our daily dietary habits? And I think that's more the idea of where I want to go with this than the shock and awe of the dumpster dive.
Wow. Okay, now before I ask my next question, I will allow you guys to submit some questions. I'm not going to call you out in the audience because people on live stream can't hear you. So
are we live streamed?
We are live streamed. Hello, world.
Sweden.
So,
hello.
Hello, Sweden. I have a friend watching in Rome. Hi, Suzanne. Anyhow, use those index cards or tweet your questions, and Tim will run them up to us momentarily. Just hold them up, and people will pick them up. So you have organized some dinners to promote this whole concept that we need to think about on wasted food. And you've had some pretty, in Massachusetts parlance, wicked important diners. Yeah. Tell me some of the people that you have served these innovative meals to.
Oh, we don't kiss and tell.
Yes, we do kiss and tell. Come on.
No, well, we had you.
Yeah. Okay, yeah.
Yeah. Who else? I don't know. This sort of caught the zeitgeist at the moment we started doing this. We were there. We were trying to figure this out and learn. We just decided to close the restaurant, do a pop-up for a couple of weeks, and it just caught the moment. And there were lines around the block and a lot of people writing about it, and people sort of all over the world asking us to come and do our interpretation of waste for their city or their country. And so it's been very exciting. It's very unexpected, and so I'm thrilled to be serving anyone. But like I said, I think the idea is to like move this conversation beyond what is expected and think about it in terms of like the responsibility or the opportunity for a chef like me or a restaurant, anybody who is involved in food service to change the culture, to change the idea of what we consider uncoveted or not delicious or inedible even in some cases, and make that a part of the everyday food culture. It's what every cuisine has done in the history of the world. Since we've domesticated agriculture, peasants were trying to eke out what the landscape can provide and figure out how to make it delicious and nutritious for their family. And that's, I think the problem with the American diet and part of the problem with our food culture and our health-related issues is that we never were forced into those kind of negotiations. We've suffered from a kind of abundance that's allowed us to become a waste-filled society, especially with food. I pointed to the example just in Sweden in Sweden I was talking actually about Japan because someone was talking about Asian culture, and I said, in Japan it's a rice culture, but in order to grow the rice for thousands of years, you needed buckwheat, and buckwheat was the great rotation crop into rice. So in America, buckwheat is largely either plowed back into the soil or fed to dog food or to pigs. In Japan, what did they do with their buckwheat? They made soba noodles, right? And so that became an iconic cultural dish that is in many ways what it means to be Japanese. So, it wasn't a chef or there wasn't Kathleen, the professor, pointing at you and saying, if you want to eat your rice, you got to eat buckwheat. Because that conversation lasts about as long as this forum, right? It's like, but if you make this food delicious and approachable, and it infuses itself into the everyday dietary habits and cultural mores, it truly becomes sustainable without someone dictating what we need to eat. So that I think is the role of a restaurant and a chef for the future of good food.
Okay, I'm going to take an audience question. Thank you for writing large. I realized I came on stage with no glasses, but they're helping me out. So I have heard that residents in the United States throw away a third of their groceries in the bag. This food waste affects methane/climate change in a big way, right? Can you provide a soundbite on this?
Well, my soundbite, the answer to that would be we waste 40% of all the food produced. So that dwarfs what we waste after we buy at the supermarket or what we throw away from our dinner plates. As attractive as it is to talk about those issues, again, because we can all activate some kind of change with it, I think the much larger issue to be concentrating on and more difficult to talk about is where in our agriculture system can we look at diversity and look at soil-supporting crops and look at nitrogen-fixing crops and look at all the crops that provide a healthy landscape that produce an abundance of food that we can then make delicious in our gastronomy, in our daily diets. To me, that's truly the definition of food waste. When you look at the American agricultural landscape, it really mimics the American food landscape, which is not diverse and not healthy and ultimately not delicious. It's not a little bit long of soundbite, but
that was good.
All right.
But this next question is coming right back at what can I do as an individual.
Yeah.
I understand what you're saying is, like, we got big issues, and I agree with those. You know that I do. But this person asks, how do we address portion size in America as waste/health?
With portion size, the number one lever to pull is deliciousness, I think. I mean, what I have seen in my experience as a chef now for 25 years is that if you give people adequate portions of delicious, nutritious food, they are satiated, and you don't need to overeat because our natural DNA is telling us that we're full and we're fine. In the book, I stumbled across in the research a scientist, a soil scientist in the 1930s who did an experiment with cows. He fertilized 2 grass pastures for dairy cows perfectly, in his mind perfectly, and then he did 2 other fields where the soil was not amended correctly and the grass suffered and the cow's diet suffered. And what he watched as the summer went on is that the cows that were eating from the well-fertilized and well-mineralized soils, the grasses from that, they were healthy, they sat down to chew their cud properly, they gained weight perfectly, and they produced incredible milk. And the cows that were fed on the soil-depleted grasslands overate. They quickly took on diet-related diseases, and their milk had all the markers of sick cows. And what this scientist predicted in his diary and his writings in the early 1930s was, if America continues to produce food in a soil-depleted environment, we will have a terrible obesity problem in this country. That was 1930. And he was exactly right. And so with the issue of overeating, I think it's directly related to the quality of what we're eating, not the quantity.
You talk about integrating food waste back into our diets on a greater and wider scale. As a chef of an extremely popular, though relatively exclusive restaurant, I guess someone has tried to get a reservation there before.
Yeah.
How do we make this revolution accessible to everyone?
Yeah, well, I think, restaurant, I appreciate the question, and it's hard for me to talk about issues that are as serious as the ones we're talking about, because it ultimately gets into the realm of feeding hungry people and democratizing these ideas. And I am a firm believer, in part because I have a vested interest in being a believer in this, but I also happen to believe this quite strongly, that on the issue of food culture, it starts up high. It trickles down. I don't mean that in the Republican idea of trickling down. I mean it I'm a bottom-up guy in the way that I'm sure a lot of us in this room are bottom-up people. But when it comes to food trends and ingrained food culture, not fads, but ingrained food culture, it starts from high up and it works its way down and infuses into the culture, as we have seen with Greek yogurt, as we've seen with kale, as we've seen with quinoa, as we've seen with sushi. These all started
Cauliflower.
with cauliflower.
Crazy.
They all started with chefs who popularized these ideas first, and then they became adopted by companies or by fast food chains or whatever, and they make their way into the culture and they become part of what it means to be the American diet. Actually happens pretty fast. I mean, having come back from Sweden, food trends do not happen there overnight like they happen here. And that's actually part of the blessing of not having a food culture, of being in the American landscape of denutrified and undelicious food, is that we tend to be like searching around for answers all the time. And we move with trends in ways that Sweden and Japan and France and all these other countries don't. So that's very positive. The negative, like with Greek yogurt, is that you get a trend that's so popular. What do you do with the whey that's siphoned off to make your Greek yogurt? Well, in upstate New York right now, the huge problem with over-acidification of soils, because the yogurt companies that have helped supply this yogurt craze, this Greek yogurt craze, are now demanding that the milk suppliers not only drop off their milk, but they pick up the whey and they take it back. They dispose of the whey. Well, what are the dairy people doing? They're taking it back to their fields and they're dumping it into their fields. And at that level, it's over-nutrifying the soil, and it's become an enormous problem. Now, if you're in Sweden or you're in Greece, what are you doing with the whey? Tons of things. I mean, in Greece, you're marinating legs of lamb. You're making those beautiful summer elixirs that they live off of in the heat. And the nutrition and the flavor is fantastic. I had many versions of whey in Sweden. I ate whey almost 3 times a day just as part of the culture. Well, that's because in Greek, you make Greek yogurt and you do something with the whey because you have to. In America, the trend goes towards Greek yogurt, and then what do you do with the waste stream? And that's why I go back to this idea of what can we do to activate, how do we activate? Well, it's about the diet, and it's about creating trends that soak up the waste without the dictate of, if you're going to eat Greek yogurt, you have to drink whey. Well, we're not going to do that. But if we make the whey delicious and we inculcate in the culture through the chef's creativity and restaurants as dictates for what's possible, or as less as dictates, but as artists and creative, as provocateurs of what's possible through delicious flavors. There's a real answer to this puzzle, and right now we're not filling that void. So I think that's my role.
Okay, I'm going to ask you one more question before we call out a couple of colleagues.
Yeah.
So to what degree is what you're doing with regard to reinventing dishes with food waste influencing your peer chefs?
That's a good question.
It is a good question.
I hope it's I would like to think I have more influence than I do. I often think I have more influence than I do. My wife tells me that. But I think the true answer is that chefs are always doing this. And that's part of the reason I actually started the whole thing with Wasted, was I feel like chefs don't get enough credit. It's in our DNA to be utilizing scraps and waste. The ravioli special at tonight's restaurant down the street might be braised lamb with vegetables. That's leftover lamb shanks that didn't sell from the night before that are repurposed into ravioli. That's waste. So that chef said on his or her menu, waste ravioli. No one would buy it. But actually, chefs and restaurants are a great place to look for answers on how to soak up the problem of waste. And that whey example with the yogurt, I think, is a good one. Leave it to chefs whose job it is, both be incentivized because of the environmental and moral considerations of what we're talking, but also economic. You're using free food and turning it into something delicious. That's our job. And I don't know a chef who isn't incentivized to fill that role. So I think we should be looking to white coats more than politicians or professors. How's that for provocative? Or government agencies. I'll say it. I'll piss off everybody.
Okay, so luckily, there are a whole bunch of people who are really psyched about the issue of wasted food and what the potential is to turn the ship around. And I want to welcome two colleagues to the stage. Michelle Lipinski, who has been involved with the ReFed report. She's going to talk to you about that. It's been a big collaboration. And Kathleen Salyer from EPA. So come on in.
Hello.
Okay, you're up first.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone. It's great to be here. So we have a $200 billion a year problem. 40% of our food is being wasted, contributing to people being hungry, greenhouse gas emissions, and a major use of our freshwater resources. Good news. The USDA and the US EPA a year ago set out a very ambitious federal goal for our whole nation to reduce that food waste by 50% by 2030. How are we going to do it? Better news, we've got a roadmap. We can get us part of the way there. So earlier this year, the ReFed project launched a roadmap that would help us get 20% of the way there in a decade. Most importantly, it outlines a set of 27 solutions that exist today with existing technology that are cost-effective and don't require major new taxes or regulations. For an $18 billion investment, we can get $100 billion in return back to taxpayers, consumers, and businesses. Win-win.
It's real money.
It is real money. So ReFed is the Rethink Food Waste Through Economics and Data project. And the roadmap wanted to look at all the things that we could possibly do to solve our food waste problem, put them on a cost curve, look at the cost effectiveness, looked at where the capital we needed, what types of things that we need. And we looked at them across the EPA hierarchy of waste reduction. So we looked at prevention, recovery, and recycling. Financial analysis was provided by Deloitte. Closed Loop Fund, who I represent today, was one of the partners, Mission Point partner, Sodexo, Walmart, NRDC. We had a wide swath. Actually, many of you from EPA and from some of the other agencies, thank you for being a part of this. Some of our representatives from cities, municipalities across the US all participated in this stakeholder process, contributing the best ideas and research that we could find. And then there was a lot of crunching of numbers. So what did we learn? So far, this is the most comprehensive analysis of our nation's food waste. $218 billion is wasted each year in growing, processing, transporting, and disposing of waste that is never eaten. Up to 40% of all of our food, 63 million tons a year. It takes up 20% of all of our nation's resources around fresh water, cropland, fertilizer, and landfill for food that's never eaten, while 1 in 7 people in our country are hungry. Despite these staggering statistics, the roadmap offered some optimism and a path forward. With these 27 cost-effective, scalable solutions, we're able to turn this around. We can reduce our food waste by 20% in a decade. We can generate $100 billion in new economic value, create 15,000 new jobs, and put the US on track to meet its 2030 goal. Reducing food waste at scale is going to take collective action across industry, government, nonprofit sector, philanthropy, private finance. We're all going to need to come together. At the Closed Loop Fund, we're committed to providing debt financing to municipalities and entrepreneurs who are bringing these technologies online and doing them at scale, and investing equity in new solutions that we may not have yet. We just did a solution search that in 1 month brought in 120 viable proposals that all need financing. The money for this project is primarily going to come from philanthropy and private capital. In fact, we don't need new regulations. We need tweaks, common sense tweaks, to existing things that we already have. And there's a role for you to play in that. In fact, in general, waste reduction unburdens our taxpayers and our businesses because there's so much cost savings in it. We found 5 specific recommendations for the federal government. The first is making food donation easier for business. The second is clarifying guidance on food donation, safe handling, and donation liability. Right now, there's not clear specific guidance on that. Third, standardizing date labeling, either through national legislation or through voluntary industry action. It's really challenging if you've got date labeling that's inconsistent. It's concerning for the customer, and it was actually the #1 most cost-effective solution we found across all of those 27. Fourth, expand grants and flexible financing for food waste recovery and recycling infrastructure. This is where we require the most capital, centralized composting, centralized treatment of organic waste, but it's also our most scalable among the 27 solutions. And finally, I hope GSA is here in the house, using our federal procurement and contractor guidelines to encourage food waste solutions, provide incentives to integrate off-grade imperfect produce into government and school menus and purchasing contracts, encourage federally funded institutional cafeterias to adopt waste tracking, analytics, trayless dining, smaller plates, and solutions that are proven to prevent waste and reduce costs, and finally, mandate food recovery among your federal food contractors. We hope that the ReFed roadmap becomes an incredible resource for you as you work to shift things in your own business and work on policy, and it can be found at refed.org, refed.org. Thank you.
Thank you. What's going on at EPA?
Great, yeah. So I'm going to emphasize a few of the aspects of the great work ReFed's been doing. So I think it's already been covered a bit on the magnitude of the problem, 40% of food going to waste. I mean, that really equates to 7 billion pounds of food a year in the US going to landfills where it generates methane. So I think you all, I hope, based on this conversation, appreciate the magnitude of the problem. And really what I want to emphasize is really the feds needing to lead by example. So ReFed, Michelle mentioned a number of the things the feds can do. And EPA has been working with USDA, FDA, CEQ on trying to address some of the policy issues around food waste. But I think for this audience, what we really, one of the areas you can most help us with is leading by example in the procurement area. So that's an area where we know billions of meals are served each year in our federal hospitals, penitentiaries, parks, and other US facilities. And that's where, as Michelle mentioned, we can really, through our procurement strategies, our contracts, really looking at how we can maximize food recovery. And so that's what we at EPA, USDA, CEQ really want to work with you all on. Even if you're not in a position where you're doing the food procurement, you can also help us in just encouraging it within your facility. So in your lunchrooms, helping educate your employees, both what they do at home and work. You can also look for your facility, what in terms of your waste hauler, what opportunities they have. If you're not already sending your organics to composting, look what opportunities. It may require additional fees, but what you can do to get your food waste to composting and out of landfills. So at EPA, we have a number of tools to assist you. So recently, late last year, we based on the magnitude of the problem, we set the U.S. food goal, first ever food goal, to reduce food loss and waste by 50%. We've already mentioned that. We also, EPA and USDA, issued a call to action. This was developed in conjunction with some of our key stakeholders, and it really looked at challenges, opportunities, and identifies best practices in reducing food waste. I encourage you all to look at that and see where you in your organization can fit and identify some of the opportunities there. We also have our Federal Green Challenge and our Food Recovery Challenge, which are both great tools and resources for you to track and engage in reducing your food waste.
Great. Thank you, Kathleen. Thank you, Michelle. Chef Dan Barber, down from New York City. Give us the final word. What's our final thought wrap up this panel for us?
Oh, Jesus.
Oh,
Put me on
yeah.
the
You knew
spot.
I was going to do that to you.
I didn't. I thought I was done. I was like, I was relaxing here. No, I love what's being said here, and it's you know, I'm on the very privileged position of just kind of floating above, because I don't have to be in the real world making decisions every day that are hugely profound. I love the idea. I can say philosophically, we all need to inculcate this into our culture, which I think is what I said a few minutes ago. But I will end by stressing that, and I gave the argument about the buckwheat into rice example. As you were talking, I was thinking of several others, just in the sense of making this a part of our culture, like the French do with coq au vin, another dish that I had when I was in Sweden for some reason, and it struck me that coq au vin is a male rooster chicken. In this country, male rooster chickens are fed to fish, actually. They're cardboard and very difficult to eat, considered not delicious. So that's not true. They're very delicious if they're cooked right, and the French figured out if you braise it in white wine and you serve it with some delicious vegetables and make a broth of it, it's one of the great dishes. And it is now iconic French dish. We don't say it's a wasted chicken. We say it's a coq au vin, and it sounds very nice. So part of our challenge might be naming some more of our dishes in French than we do. I don't know.
Thank you
very much. Thank you.
Thank you.